Okay, I thought we'd look at different types of government through a slightly different lens. And what that means is I'm looking at the types of leaders that we get. But these are different types of leaders and different types of government. So it's a link there. But I'm just trying to explain this so that you have an understanding of why the leader type also links to the government type. Because then there's the way that people get to live depends on what type of leader they have. So originally, the leader was the hero. So it was a person who could, kill the most food, was the best provider, fended off the bad things, that hero type mentality. So societies were led in cave time and coming out of the cave time by the person who was the strongest or the greatest protector in the community. And so that's the leader as the hero. This persisted through time. So Julius Caesar, you may have heard of, hopefully when you did Roman history, if you've done Roman history. Julius Caesar was a hero. He defeated a lot of the Gauls up in what is now Germany. So he was also a hero. So people who have freed the citizens or who are great war heroes often became great leaders as well. So Alexander the Great. So, a few people in history were great military leaders, and then they became leaders of the society in which they were in based on that heroic act. Then we had the leaders who were chosen by God. So here I've got a picture of the pharaohs because they were a theocracy. So Theo being God, Crassy being type of government. And the belief system there was in the society that the leaders were chosen by God. All of the religious deities. So shamans in American Indian times, they were chosen by the spirits. So there is this idea throughout history of our leader in a society being ordained or picked or chosen by God to lead them out or to lead them as a society. In the Bible, they talk about Moses leading people out of the desert. You've got Joan of Arc, who is seen as being a religious woman who led a rebellion in France. So this all happens in history, and there's this belief system that God has chosen that particular leader, and that led to things like theocracy. Then, of course, we have the leader who's chosen by the people, and this is Greeks. So the Greeks did this through democracy. Now, of course, the leaders back then had to be male, they had to own land. There were all sorts of rules around what type of man it could be to lead the people that they could choose from. And only those who were able to vote were, again, men who owned land. So it wasn't really by all the people, but it was, some of the people got to choose their leader. So then this moved us away from things like theocracy, where the ordination, like the choosing by God, was passed down through families. And it meant that it was more open to members of society generally to lead their society. So that's where the democracy begins and where the leader is chosen by the people. Then, of course, you have people who become leaders through basically sheer force of will or might. They want to dominate their society in a particular way, so they use either ideological might, or they use physical might, or a mixture of both. So this is actually a picture of Stalin, who was very, very good at this. He took an ideology or an ideological structure that was begun by a guy called Lenin, and then Stalin added violence to that ideology, and so he actually led through might. Basically, if you disagreed with Stalin, he would kill you. So lots of people started to agree with Stalin, which is why he became a dictator. And dictators are often very, very violent, and they are often very harsh on their population. So Mao Zedong, again, was quite happy to kill his population if they didn't comply. Stalin, a whole range of them through time. The Cuban situation. Lots of dictators don't really take well to rejection, and they don't take well to being disagreed with. And so quite often they will quite happily kill people. But it doesn't have to be physical, it can actually be ideological as well. So initially Hitler won people over with ideology. He didn't actually win them over with might initially. So then might became a thing with his SS troops. But you'll do that later on in history. Then, of course, you can be a leader just simply because you're rich. So this is kind of, I think, where we are today. So you may have heard in class I talk about a corpocracy, where I think the corporates actually have a lot more say in society today than the actual elected politicians, because the politicians are owned to a certain degree by the people who have the money. And often, you know, you get people like Bill Gates coming up and saying things, and the world listens to Bill Gates basically because he's got money. So there's this leadership through money idea, and that leads to a different type of government, really, and it's a different way of operating. And that's where corruption comes through and things like that. This is interesting. I think it's always been around. People with money have always tried to bring society to their way of thinking. But I think it's just more prevalent now than it has been in the past, but that's my personal position. Okay, so they're the different ways that you can lead, and they obviously all tie to different types of governments, and we're going to be doing a case study in class on North Korea.